Archive report, the boy who drew symbols across many years, clergy have occasionally documented unusual behavior that could not be easily explained. Some cases are later dismissed as imagination or stress. Others remain recorded in church archives because the circumstances surrounding them were never fully understood. The following account comes from one such report. The church first became aware of the boy after his parents contacted their parish priest about something unusual that had been happening inside their home. At first, the situation seemed harmless. The boy was 11 years old and known to be quiet and creative. He enjoyed drawing more than almost anything else. Most evenings he could be found sitting at the kitchen table or at his desk, filling notebooks with sketches of animals, buildings, and small scenes from his imagination. His parents never worried about it until the drawings began to change. One evening, while finishing his homework, the boy began covering an entire page with strange symbols. They weren't letters. They weren't shapes anyone recognized. They looked like patterns made of curved lines, circles, and sharp angles, arranged in ways that seemed strangely organized. His mother asked what he was drawing. The boy barely looked up from the paper. "I don't know," he said calmly. "I just feel like drawing them." At first, his parents thought little of it. Children often invent strange shapes when they doodle. But the next day, the same symbols appeared again. And the day after that. Soon every notebook in the house contained the same strange markings. Sometimes the boy filled entire pages with them. What concerned his parents most was how easily he drew them. He never paused. He never erased anything. He seemed to know exactly what each symbol should look like before he even began. One afternoon, his father asked him a simple question. "Where did you see those before?" The boy thought for a moment. Then he shook his head. "I've never seen them anywhere." "Then how do you know how to draw them?" his father asked. The boy answered quietly. "They just appear in my head." Over the next several days, the drawings became more frequent. The boy began sketching the symbols not only in notebooks, but on loose paper, cardboard, and even small scraps he found around the house. Once, his parents found one of the symbols drawn lightly along the edge of his desk. Concerned, they decided to speak with their parish priest. The priest agreed to visit their home. When he arrived, the boy greeted him politely and seemed perfectly normal. They spoke casually for several minutes. The priest asked about school, friends, and hobbies. Eventually, he asked about the drawings. The boy quietly went to his room and returned with several notebooks. Page after page was filled with symbols. The priest studied them carefully. What he noticed immediately was repetition. The same shapes appeared again and again in the same arrangement. They didn't look random. They looked structured, almost like a written system. The priest asked the boy if he could draw one of the symbols again. The boy picked up a pencil and began immediately. Within seconds, the symbol was finished. The priest asked where he had learned it. The boy looked confused. "I didn't learn it," he said. "I just remember it." The priest asked what he meant by that. The boy answered quietly, "Sometimes I see them when I close my eyes." The priest did not react immediately. Instead, he asked several more questions. Did the symbols appear in dreams? Did he hear anyone telling him to draw them? Had anyone shown him similar shapes before? The boy answered no to every question. Over the next several days, the priest continued observing. Each time the boy was given paper, he drew the same patterns. Always the same shapes. Always the same order. Eventually, the priest contacted diocesan officials and arranged a quiet evaluation at the parish. The meeting took place inside a small chapel. Only a few clergy members were present. The priest began with a calm prayer. The boy sat quietly. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then the priest placed a blank sheet of paper in front of him. "Can you draw the symbols again?" he asked. The boy nodded and began. His pencil moved quickly across the page. But halfway through the drawing, He suddenly stopped. His hand froze. The priest asked what was wrong. The boy looked around the chapel slowly. Then he whispered something unexpected. "They don't want me to draw them here." The priest asked who they were, but the boy shook his head. "I don't know." The priest continued praying calmly. After a few moments, the boy lowered the pencil. When the session ended, the priest asked him how he felt. The boy answered something surprising. "I can't remember the symbols anymore." To test this, the priest gave him another blank sheet of paper. The boy tried to draw again, but this time he hesitated. The shapes were gone. He could not remember them. In the weeks that followed, the drawings never returned. The boy continued filling his notebooks again, but now only with ordinary sketches. Animals, buildings, trees. The strange symbols never appeared again. In his final report, the priest wrote, "Whether the markings came from imagination, memory, or influence not yet understood, their sudden disappearance during prayer was carefully noted." The report was later archived. The final note in the file reads, "Patterns repeated without instruction must always be recorded and observed carefully." Witness account: the girl who felt watched. Throughout the years, clergy have occasionally been asked to review situations that seemed unusual but difficult to explain. Some reports turn out to have ordinary causes. Others remain documented simply because the circumstances surrounding them were never fully understood. The following account comes from one such report. The church first became aware of the girl after her parents contacted their parish priest about a feeling she had been experiencing for several weeks. At first, the problem sounded simple. The girl was 12 years old. She was quiet, polite, and had never caused any serious concern for her family. But one evening, she told her parents something strange. She said she felt like someone was watching her. Her parents assumed she meant the normal feeling many children have when they are alone in a room or in the dark. They reassured her and told her not to worry. But the feeling did not go away. Over the next several days, the girl repeated the same statement. She said the sensation followed her throughout the house. Not just at night, sometimes during the afternoon, sometimes when she was doing homework, sometimes when she was sitting quietly in her bedroom. It was not a sound. It was not a shadow. Just a strong feeling that she was being observed. Her parents began paying closer attention. They asked her to describe exactly what she felt. The girl explained it carefully. "It's like someone is standing behind me," she said. "But when I turn around, nobody is there." At first, her parents believed it might be stress or anxiety. School had recently become more difficult, and they wondered if the pressure was affecting her. But the girl insisted it wasn't fear of school. It was something else. She said the feeling only happened inside the house, never outside, never at school. Always inside, sometimes in the hallway, sometimes near the staircase, but most often in her bedroom. One evening her mother sat with her while she finished homework. After several minutes, the girl suddenly stopped writing. Her pencil froze above the page. Her eyes slowly moved toward the bedroom door. "What's wrong?" her mother asked. The girl whispered quietly, "It's here again." Her mother looked toward the doorway. Nothing was there. The hallway was empty. Still, the girl refused to continue her work until her mother moved closer beside her. After 2 weeks of these experiences, the parents decided to contact the parish priest. The priest agreed to visit the home. When he arrived, the girl greeted him politely. At first, their conversation was completely normal. They spoke about school, hobbies, and her favorite books. Then the priest gently asked about the feeling she had described. The girl hesitated for a moment before answering. "It doesn't talk," she said. "It just watches." The priest asked how she knew it was watching. The girl thought for a moment. "I just feel it." The priest asked if the feeling was frightening. The girl shook her head. "Not exactly." "Then what does it feel like?" He asked. she answered slowly, like someone waiting. The priest did not dismiss the situation, but he also did not jump to conclusions. Many experiences like this can have ordinary explanations. Still, he agreed to return for several visits and observe carefully. Over the next few days, the priest spent time speaking with the family and walking through the house. The building itself was quiet and ordinary. Nothing unusual appeared. Then one evening, while the priest was sitting with the girl in the living room, she suddenly looked toward the staircase. Her expression changed. "It's there," she whispered. The priest turned and looked. The staircase was empty, but the girl continued staring at the same spot. The priest asked what she felt. She answered quietly, "It moved closer." The priest wrote the statement down, but remained calm. He asked the family if they would allow him to say a short prayer in the house. They agreed. He began the prayer quietly, while standing near the staircase. The house remained silent. Nothing changed immediately, but the girl slowly relaxed. After the prayer ended, the priest asked how she felt. She looked around the room carefully. Then she said something surprising. "I don't feel it anymore." The priest continued visiting the house over the next several weeks. The feeling never returned. The girl slept normally again. She completed homework without interruption, and she never again reported the sensation of being watched. In his final report, the priest wrote, "Feelings of presence are often difficult to explain and may arise from many causes. However, the sudden disappearance of the sensation following prayer was noted carefully." The report was later placed in church archives. The final line recorded in the document reads, "Some experiences leave no clear evidence, yet they remain documented for future reference." Documented encounter. A man who felt touched over the years. Clergy have occasionally received reports of unusual experiences that could not be easily explained. Some are later understood through ordinary causes. Others remain recorded simply because the circumstances surrounding them were never fully clarified. The following account comes from one such report. The church first heard about the man after he contacted his parish priest with a concern that had been troubling him for several weeks. At first, the experience seemed small. The man was in his mid-30s and lived alone in a quiet apartment near the edge of town. He worked regular hours and lived a fairly ordinary life. Nothing about his daily routine had changed. But one evening, while sitting in his living room reading, he felt something unexpected. A light touch on his shoulder. Not painful, not forceful, just a brief sensation, as if someone had gently placed their hand there for a moment. The man turned around immediately. No one was behind him. He assumed it must have been a muscle twitch, or perhaps a strange sensation caused by fatigue. So he ignored it. But 2 nights later, it happened again. This time he was standing in the kitchen washing dishes. Once again he felt the same thing, a brief touch against his arm. He turned quickly. The kitchen was empty. He checked the apartment carefully. Every door was locked. No one else was there. For several days, nothing happened. The man eventually forgot about the strange sensation. Then one night, while lying in bed trying to fall asleep, the feeling returned. This time, the touch was against his hand. Not a grab, not pressure, just a gentle contact, as if someone had brushed his fingers for a second. He sat up quickly and turned on the bedside lamp. The room was empty. The apartment was silent. The experience left him uneasy. Over the next week, the same sensation occurred several more times. Always brief, always unexpected. Sometimes on his shoulder, sometimes on his arm, once on the back of his hand. Each time the man reacted immediately, looking around the room to see who might be there. But the result was always the same. No one. No movement. Nothing out of place. Eventually, the man decided to speak with his parish priest. He explained everything carefully. The priest listened without interrupting. He asked several questions. When did the touches occur? Did the man hear voices? Did anything move in the apartment? The answer to each question was no. The priest explained that unusual physical sensations can sometimes come from stress or fatigue. But because the experiences continued to happen inside the same home, he agreed to visit and observe. When the priest arrived, the apartment appeared completely ordinary. Nothing in the environment seemed unusual. The priest spent time speaking with the man and walking through the rooms. Everything remained quiet. For most of the evening, nothing happened. Then, while the two men were sitting in the living room speaking, the man suddenly stopped mid-sentence. His eyes widened slightly. "What is it?" the priest asked. The man slowly lifted his arm. "I just felt it again," he said. "Someone touched my arm." The priest had been sitting directly across from him. He had seen no movement at all. The room had remained completely still. The priest asked the man to describe the sensation. The answer was always the same. "It feels like someone trying to get my attention." The priest wrote the statement down. After observing for a while longer, the priest suggested saying a short prayer together. The man agreed. They stood quietly in the center of the living room while the priest began. The prayer lasted only a few minutes. Nothing unusual happened during it, but something changed afterward. In the days that followed, the man waited to see if the sensation would return. It never did. Weeks passed, then months. The strange touches never happened again. The man returned to his normal routine and eventually stopped worrying about the experience. In his final report, the priest wrote, "Physical sensations without visible cause may arise from many explanations. However, the sudden disappearance of the phenomenon after prayer was carefully recorded. The report was later archived." The final line in the document reads, "Experiences reported with consistency should always be documented, even when their origin remains unknown." Archived testimony, the child who knew names. Throughout the years, clergy have occasionally been asked to review situations that seemed unusual but difficult to explain. Some reports are eventually understood through ordinary circumstances. Others are recorded simply because the details surrounding them could never be fully clarified. The following account comes from one such report. The church first became aware of the child after a family contacted their parish priest with a concern they could not explain. At first, the situation seemed harmless. The boy was 9 years old and known for being quiet and thoughtful. He spent most of his time reading, drawing, or playing quietly in the yard behind the family's home. Nothing about his behavior had ever caused concern. But one evening during dinner, the boy said something unexpected. He mentioned a name no one in the family recognized. His parents assumed it was a classmate or perhaps a character from a book. They asked him who the person was. The boy answered calmly, "He lives here." His parents laughed and assumed he was joking. But the boy continued speaking about the name. He described the person as if he knew them. Over the next several days, the boy mentioned more names, each one unfamiliar, each spoken as if the people were real. Sometimes he spoke about them while playing alone. Other times he mentioned them casually during conversations. His parents eventually asked where he had heard the names. The boy thought for a moment before answering. "I just know them," he said. When asked how he knew them, the boy could not explain. He simply repeated that the names appeared in his mind. At first, his parents believed he was simply imagining stories. Children often invent characters when they play. But one afternoon, something happened that unsettled them. While sitting at the kitchen table doing homework, the boy suddenly said a name again. His father looked up. "Who is that?" he asked. The boy answered without hesitation. "He used to live here." His father asked what he meant. The boy pointed toward the backyard. "He's buried out there." The statement caught both parents off guard. They asked him why he believed that. The boy simply shrugged. That's where he said he was. Concerned by the conversation, the parents decided to speak with their parish priest. The priest listened carefully as they described what had been happening. He asked the parents to write down every name the boy had mentioned. When the list was complete, the priest noticed something unusual. Several of the names sounded old, not common names for children today. Still, the priest did not assume anything supernatural. There could be many explanations. The priest agreed to visit the home and speak with the boy directly. When he arrived, the child greeted him politely. They spoke casually for a while. The priest asked about school and friends. Then he gently asked about the names. The boy answered calmly, "They tell me their names." The priest asked who they were. The boy looked toward the backyard window. "The people who used to live here." The priest asked if the boy saw them. The boy shook his head. "No, I just hear the names." The priest wrote the response down. Over the next several days, he continued visiting the family and observing. The boy mentioned a few more names during that time. Each time the priest carefully recorded them. Eventually, the priest decided to research the history of the property. Old records showed that the land had been used for housing many decades earlier, before the current home had been built. Several of the names the boy had spoken appeared in historical property documents connected to the area. The discovery surprised the priest, but it still did not prove how the child might have learned them. Children can overhear conversations or encounter information in unexpected ways. The priest continued observing for several more weeks. Then one day the boy stopped mentioning the names entirely. When asked about them later, the boy seemed confused. "I don't remember saying those," he said. The priest continued checking with the family for several months. The names never returned. The boy's behavior returned completely to normal. In his final report, the priest wrote, "Children occasionally repeat information whose source cannot be immediately identified." The accuracy of certain names in this case was noted, though the origin of the knowledge remained unclear. The report was later archived. The final note recorded in the document reads, "Information provided without clear source should be documented carefully for future reference." Recorded incident: the patient who spoke alone over the years. Clergy and medical professionals have occasionally shared reports of behavior that seemed unusual and difficult to explain. Most cases are eventually understood through medical or psychological causes, but some incidents are documented simply because the circumstances surrounding them remain unclear. The following account comes from one such report. The church first became aware of the patient after a hospital. Chaplain contacted a local priest about a situation that had been developing inside one of the hospital's long-term care wards. At first, the situation did not seem alarming. The patient was an older man who had been admitted several weeks earlier after experiencing severe exhaustion and confusion. Doctors believed the symptoms were related to stress and lack of sleep. For the first few days, the patient remained quiet and cooperative. He followed the instructions of nurses and doctors and spoke calmly during routine examinations. But one night, a nurse on duty noticed something unusual. As she passed the patient's room, she heard him talking. Not loudly, but clearly. The nurse assumed he was speaking on the phone. However, when she glanced inside the room, she saw something that caught her attention. The patient was sitting alone in his bed. There was no phone in his hand, no visitor in the room. Yet he was speaking as if someone were sitting directly beside him. The nurse paused in the hallway and listened for a moment. The patient spoke slowly, pausing between sentences as if waiting for someone to answer. Then he would respond again. The conversation continued for several minutes. Eventually, the nurse entered the room and asked who he was speaking to. The patient looked surprised. "No one," he said calmly. "I was just thinking out loud." The nurse assumed the man might simply be confused or restless. Patients sometimes speak to themselves during long hospital stays. But the next night, the same thing happened again. Another nurse heard the patient talking quietly in the room. Once again, the voice sounded like part of a conversation. There were pauses, responses, even moments where the patient nodded his head as if listening, yet the room remained empty. After several nights of similar reports, the hospital chaplain decided to speak with the patient personally. The chaplain entered the room during the afternoon when the patient appeared calm and alert. They spoke for several minutes about ordinary topics. The patient answered questions clearly. He did not appear confused. Then the chaplain gently asked about the late-night conversations. The patient hesitated before answering, and he said something unexpected. "I'm not really alone when I talk." The chaplain asked what he meant. The patient looked toward the corner of the room. "They come sometimes," he said quietly. The chaplain asked who they were, but the patient simply shrugged. "I don't know their names," he said. "They just ask questions." The chaplain carefully recorded the conversation and later contacted the parish priest connected to the hospital. Together, they agreed to observe the situation more closely. Over the next several evenings, nurses continued reporting the same behavior. The patient would begin speaking quietly in the middle of the night. Sometimes the conversations lasted only a few minutes. Other times they continued much longer. Each time the patient appeared calm, never frightened, never distressed, simply engaged in quiet discussion with someone no one else could see. Eventually, the priest decided to visit the hospital one evening. He entered the patient's room shortly after sunset. At first, the room was silent. The patient greeted him politely and seemed pleased to have company. They spoke for several minutes about the patient's health and the progress of his treatment. Then, while the priest was speaking, the patient suddenly stopped and looked toward the opposite side of the room. The priest followed his gaze. The corner was empty. The patient nodded slightly toward the empty space. Then he whispered, "They're here again." The priest asked who he meant. The patient answered calmly, "The ones who talk?" The priest remained calm and continued the conversation gently. Eventually, he suggested saying a short prayer together. The patient agreed. The prayer lasted only a few minutes. Nothing unusual happened during it, but something changed afterward. Over the next several nights, the nurses noticed something different. The patient no longer spoke during the night. His room remained completely quiet. Days passed, then weeks. The conversations never returned. When the chaplain later asked the patient about the voices, the man seemed confused. "I don't remember talking to anyone," he said. His health gradually improved, and he was eventually discharged from the hospital. In his final report, the priest wrote, "Conversation without visible companion may arise from many possible causes." However, the sudden disappearance of the behavior following prayer was carefully noted. The report was later archived. The final note in the document reads, "Unusual testimony must always be recorded, even when its origin cannot be fully explained.